Welcome to the Move the Stairs podcast. We are recording today, Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, and we want to thank you so much for joining us.
We are very excited today because we're going to be joined by Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams from Dr. Bridget, MD, to talk about using cannabis in her medical practice.
You know, trust is the key word to building customer loyalty, and we know that trust is key to building a medical practice. So we're going to talk to Dr. Bridget about her tips on creating that trust.
Absolutely. And Dr. Bridget is working on her second book, by the way. Well, we'll talk about how she's getting coverage for that work. It's soon to be published, second edition, in fact. And that'll happen in our Insider Media Relations segment.
And then finally, we're going to have Dr. Bridget explain a little bit more about writing sparks and other techniques that she uses to connect with her audience and build a resilient cannabis brand. So let's get started. We'll welcome Dr. Bridget into the studio. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, Dr. Bridget?
Absolutely. Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me. So yes, my name is Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams. I am a family physician by trade. I still am. I still practice. I did not let go of everything, in the process, but I definitely changed my shift. And so I'm a family physician. I spent almost 20 years at the Cleveland Clinic before really having one patient very early in my career who was a breast cancer survivor and a new diabetic, that we started having conversations about cannabis. And I was already in the process of trying to help patients get off of medications because they wanted to really take control of their health and their wellness. She was one of those people. And where I thought cannabis had no space in the medical realm, I learned a lot and saw how it transformed her health. So that's my origin story.
I love that. And I know you've made a difference in so many patients' lives, and that is really key here. And so you need to nurture and protect not only your patients, but your brand. And you have to build that customer loyalty to do that. So with so many changing rules, both at the federal level and the state level, I'm interested in how you navigate the cannabis industry on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So it is, every day is different, right? And you never know what news headline might change your entire business, right? So not only do I try to keep abreast of what's going on, but I work with a great team of people that we all have different skill sets. And so based on who we are and what we're best at, we all stay pretty vigilant about how things are changing, and not only how to stay ahead of the market or how to stay ahead of the changing cannabis industry, but always staying true to what we want out of healthcare, out of wellness. What do we want for our patients? And that stays central to what we do. And then we kind of dance around the industry in the process.
That's
great. Interesting. And yeah, I totally agree. As a medical doctor, Dr. Bridget, I would imagine you've had very serious concerns when you started to embark down this road of talking about cannabis and advocating for the plant for the wellness of your patients. So how did you go about deciding that it was important for you and important for others to kind of see the positivity and some of the options that are out there that aren't necessarily, mainstream and conventional?
Absolutely. So when I had that first patient, and I was really confident, that cannabis doesn't help anything and this is silly. And so I really was trying to help her get back on track, right? And in the process, started seeing all this research that was happening at that period of time, mainly in other countries. And so it became very evident to me that everything I thought I knew wasn't necessarily true when it comes to wellness, what holistic care was really about. So that experience really put me into a space where I started reanalyzing what patients wanted and needed, what worked and didn't work. And I wanted to be a part of helping them take or reclaim their own wellness in the process. And so, no, it's not always easy. And I kind of figured that after being in traditional medicine for so long, I was willing to put my neck out there and really help people look at what healthcare could mean if we looked at it differently.
Takes some courage, because I'm sure there are other in the medical community who maybe have the same like thinking, but well, I won't, I'll take a dent in my career. So let's talk about your book for a moment, because I love the title, Courage in Cannabis.
Yeah.
With your busy schedule, why did you decide to write that? And when you were writing it, who did you have in mind? Who was the target audience?
Honestly, it's one of those things. I did not have a choice. I was so compelled by the stories of the patients coming in that you're right. I could have said, oh, these are great and moved on, but I was just moved by the experiences of patients. I had grown men with tears as I would hand over a card saying, I can go home and tell my 10-year-old son I'm not a pothead, that I'm a patient, that this helps me. And I had women that were coming in saying, I'm taking this card and I'm going back to church because I've been afraid to go to church because I use cannabis, and now I can show them I'm a patient. And so when these stories started occurring, and no one was talking about these, people were more concerned about the political aspects of cannabis and could you grow and what's the cost? And no one was talking about that patient experience. So I started actually writing the stories myself. Actually, I had an opportunity to publish them. And right at that moment, I said, you know what, these aren't my stories. Like, it didn't feel right. I didn't connect with me writing a story about somebody else and their experiences. So I held back. And of course, COVID happened and I got exposed to what an anthology was, where you can help patients or help people write their stories. So my book is a collection of numerous people, some of them more comfortable with writing than others, and they get to share their own stories and actually also profit. And that was more interesting to me.
It's interesting in some of the pre-podcast conversations our team had with you, Dr. Bridget. You talked about your love for the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and I remember that from my childhood as well. Did you draw on inspiration from that series? Sort of the bonds and parallels that you drew from those stories. Are you hoping that your readers are going to have a similar reaction to your book?
Yeah, I hope so, because I'm very conscious that the stories have an inspirational tone at the end of the day, right? Because all these people really went through something to get where they are now. And I want it to be motivating and educational for the reader. And so I didn't realize in the very beginning, I didn't set out to say, I'm making cannabis chicken soup for the soul. Started developing, I realized, wait, there's something about this that I connect to. And then it dawned on me, those incredible stories that you used to read in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and how there could just be a little short story can just kind of set you in the right mindset for the day. And yes, I wanted something that helped and inspired people in a new way in the cannabis, and these are stories about people. Cannabis is a character in those stories.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other thing we chatted about, I know before we started the podcast, is here at M&C Communications, we're all former journalists. So we know what the media is expecting, and we use that to help our clients because we find there are a lot of opportunities in speaking with the media. Some are kind of afraid of the media, so we kind of teach them how to go about it, to get their name out there, to position themselves as a leader in the industry. So I'm curious, did you work with the media at all to promote your book?
So, well, clearly we have our book 1 and now we're going towards book 2. Initially I wasn't quite sure how this all worked. So I had some friends that were in the media space that helped kind of, sidelined and helped me through the process as far as how do we get this out there. The benefit of having multiple authors in a book. So the first book, there was 18 of us. This book, between the sparks as well as the full chapters, there's, almost close to 40 people, right? And so I realized one of the advantages of that is that you have 40 people that are now promoting your book, right? And so that was one way we approached it. And I did bring in a PR person along the way after the first book launched, and looking at what worked and didn't work. With the second book, we're really bringing in a full marketing campaign on this one so that we can, and of course, the first book follows in behind that as well, so that we have better outreach and so that the book gets to where it's supposed to be for the right people.
Dr. Bridget, you've mentioned the sparks, and I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit about what the sparks are. And do the sparks help you in developing media relationships, specifically maybe with one or two media people who, when a story comes out in the industry, you would be the one that they would call first?
Absolutely. So the sparks really came about that over the last 2 years, I've spent that time traveling the country, doing talks, doing conferences, and meeting really amazing people in the process. And when we started putting together the chapters for this book, I wanted the people that inspired me and that I knew inspired others to have some input in this. Many times they're incredibly busy people. And so I did not think they would be able to commit to writing full chapters. But I did think that they could bring in a short testimony or a quote. Part of it is that it helps build the brand, familiar names that people know, draw more people in. And of course, it's what's different about Courage in Cannabis. It's not just submit your story. We are a community. I could say networking group, but it's way beyond that. Like, we work together, we support each other, we utilize each other's resources the longer that we, get to know each other. So I've definitely, over time, between my own brand as well as the book, developed relationships with people where, if something's going on in cannabis as well as outside, just, from my family medicine point of view, that they do call on us. And we're building a speakers bureau for the authors of the book. So many of the authors wanted to do better interviews, and they have amazing stories, but they don't have the experience. So we're bringing in a course that they will take, as well as myself. You can never, you can always refresh yourself on how to do good interviewing. And so they'll start doing that in June. And then at the end of them taking the course, we'll have like a speaker showcase, as well as now we'll collectively take that group of authors and put them in front of different speakers bureaus so that they get new opportunities.
It's great.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I feel like, in some instances, maybe cannabis business owners could use a speakers bureau too, because it's really hard to tell your story in this space. So Do you have any specific tips that you have kind of refreshed yourself on for preparing people for interviews, or maybe looking ahead to the speakers bureau, or just some general tips that you might be able to offer folks before they get a microphone kind of in their face and saying, hey, tell us more about this?
Absolutely. So even with doing this, not only did our authors sign up for this opportunity, but some of our sponsors. This year the book is under my nonprofit, and so we have sponsorship to build the exposure of the book as well and to get into new places. And they were signing up for the Speakers Bureau. So I agree with you that there is a little bit of riding a bike when it comes to interviewing, what have you, with experience, but there's also, you can fall into bad habits easy. And so what I've realized as far as what makes a good interview and what I advise, our authors up until now is to be authentic, to, people feel like they have to take on some other character to share their story, but people really want to know you. And that the majority of people that are listening, that are seeing you, that are watching you, they want you to do well. And so many times we get overwhelmed with, did I say it perfectly? And how did I say it? And did I share all my information? And, you're all in your head about it. But if you realize that there are people on the other end that just want to connect with you and they want you to do well. And when you slur your speech or get a word wrong, they don't care, right? They don't really care. So just be yourself. And I think that makes the best interview.
That's a great tip. I think that is so true. Your best self comes through when you're authentic. You're absolutely right. So real quick, I want to look ahead to the next episode of the Move the Stairs podcast, when we're going to be chatting with the first Black woman to have a cannabis manufacturing license through the City of Denver's Social Equity Program. Her name is Ashley Jenkins, and she's the owner of MT Growers, and that'll be in a couple of weeks. So we look forward to talking to her.
All right. Thanks, Diane. The last part of our podcast record here, Dr. Bridget, we talk about brand resiliency and ways that, we can strengthen your brand. In your case, it's strengthening your storytelling in the book that you're working on and the stories of people that you've worked with. And in the CBD and cannabis space, it's weathering whatever threat may be out there, anything that's going to potentially damage their reputation and polishing their reputation so that they're doing a great job telling their story. So when something negative does happen, ultimately, they can come out and prepare for the unexpected and come out on top from that. So with all of that being said, kind of in the realm in looking through that lens, what are your plans moving forward? And, how is what you're doing right now strengthening the overall reputation of cannabis? You talked a lot about stigma earlier in the conversation and people being really moved that, they felt like they couldn't do things because they were politicized. Cannabis was politicized. So how is your work, taking that and moving it forward?
Absolutely. So I feel that my drive in a lot of what I do in the cannabis space is about the stigma. I think it hit me a certain way when I met people living in shame and guilt because they were using this plant before it was legal. And then people that could utilize it and benefit from it choose not to out of fear of the stigma. And so I feel that for the next, going forward, everything that I do is about mainstreaming and educating so that people that need this have access and confidence, and people that have felt the shame and guilt are freed from that. And so it's mainstreaming everything that I do. So, I still do, primary care, and I'm entering into doing some more ventures in the health space, and cannabis will be a part of it. So I'm not only with my medical practice, but I'm doing a weight loss practice, what have you. Cannabis will be a part of that as a mainstream option, not as some alternative secretive aspect, right? And even with the book, these stories are meant to be given to churchgoers and aunts and uncles and legislators so that they can see a different side to the cannabis space that they probably aren't seeing when they're just dealing with lobbyists and laws. Mm-hmm. And so the more we mainstream this, we'll be able to own and stay ahead in this space, because ultimately it will be mainstreamed by pharmaceutical companies. And in the process, it will limit some of the great entrepreneurial opportunities that, you were just talking about with the woman in Denver. If everything goes through pharmaceutical companies, we're only left really with a recreational space, and will not really give us opportunity to really help people in the way that many of us like to do. So, staying in the mainstream space is my goal is.
Very good. And that says to me that you're always looking forward, which I love, because we always talk with our guests about, forecasting, try to look ahead and see what's on the horizon. So given that, what would you say are the biggest challenges or issues, or actually they could also be opportunities that you're planning for the next 3 to 6 months as part of building your brand resiliency?
Absolutely. So definitely working with media groups that I feel can connect with diverse populations, right? So instead of focusing, I think in the very beginning, I was inward facing. And this is what I find to be the problem in the cannabis space. We educate people who are either enthusiasts or they want to work in the industry. But to really get to true patients, outward facing education is not as easy. And so a lot of the work that I want to do is doing more outward facing promotion, reaching people that never would have thought about it. I'm putting my CBD brand, I'm not going to as many cannabis shows. I go to beauty conferences. I go to holistic shows. I go to places where cannabis is, sometimes I'm the only one there. But that's how you normalize it and be able to reach a new audience. And so we're going to have to do that if we wanted to continue the industry that we're building.
I think that's a great opportunity, and a great way to look at it is you're not singing with the choir there. You're out there and you're really talking to people who maybe don't even know that much or have significant misconceptions about cannabis. I want people to know how they can get a hold of you, where they can get your book, and when is the new book going to be published?
Yes. So the easiest way to really connect is drbridgetmd.com. So that has pretty much everything that I'm doing in one place. We also have courageincannabis.com, where you can see all the authors and a little snippet of their stories. And you can buy the book there, but also on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, and in many small bookstores across the US.
That's wonderful. Well, I can't tell you how much we've enjoyed interviewing you today, and we've learned so much. And I think the tactics that you've talked about on how you're building your brand are fantastic. And there's a lot of new information out there that people are going to be able to use and put to practice today. And that's very cool. So thank you so much, Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams from drbridgetmd.com for joining us on the Move the Stairs podcast. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great conversation. Boy, she's got so much wisdom, and I love how she reflects. We're talking about how to better protect your brand through brand protection PR, and how she was said. And this is so typical. She was kind of inward facing, and she thought, well, I'll need to kind of expand that a little bit, and that's easy to do because people get really busy in the day-to-day operations of their business, and they don't look up and look out. So I think that was just a good moment for people to pick up on.
I think so too. I think when we talk about building customer loyalty, how she's basically creating a speakers bureau, she's creating her own tribe, and all those people are then talking about they're learning, they're being educated, they're talking about cannabis, but of course they're also talking about her. That builds trust when you have people talking about you. So I thought that was fantastic as far as building customer loyalty, because that trust is built when people would not only hear from you, but they hear from other people, and you're educating them all at the same time.
And, kind of in that same vein, Diane, Dr. Bridget talked about, how being interviewed by media, it's kind of like riding a bike. Once you do it, you can be really good at it, but it's also really easy to fall into some bad habits. So I think that, staying fresh, keeping up to date on kind of the best practices for being interviewed, there's not only a benefit for some of the folks who are being featured in her book, but also cannabis business owners in general. It's important to stay fresh on those things. Give yourself an interview in the mirror, right? Make sure it sounds good in your,
or on Zoom, right?
Practicing
you can record yourself
what
on
you're
Zoom.
preaching.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. You can.
Yeah, I wrote down, she said, people want to know you. And I know that sounds so simple, but a lot of times when people talk to the media, they think, oh, they're out to get me. No, they want to know about you. Your customers want to know about you, and they want you to do well. So just be you. Just be transparent.
Absolutely. And in building the resilient brand, outward facing. Boy, isn't that true? Mitch, you were talking about inward facing, and Jordan, you were talking about, constantly looking at what you're doing and seeing how you can be better, but also always remembering to be outward facing, connecting with other people, not only in the industry, but I loved how she said she's the only person at many of the conferences that she goes to, because she wants this to become much more mainstream. And that's one of the ways that she does that. And that's brilliant. That was super. So I love that part as well.
Yeah. And that has a trickle down effect too. She'll be at one year, and then somebody else will pop up there, and pretty soon, 5 years down the road, it's not an exception to the rule anymore, which is important because you're expanding audiences and reaching new people. So an amazing podcast and an amazing podcast episode and interview. So we'd once again like to thank Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams from Dr. Bridget MD for joining us on the Move the Stairs podcast today. We hope you enjoyed it as well, and tune in for our next all new episode of the Move the Stairs podcast. That'll be published in a couple of weeks. We'll see you.